This is just a quick overview of three major authors of fairy tales, all French. We can argue that the literary fairy tale, which we're going to be focusing on in this class, started in the 1600s in France. Now, these fairy tales were based, many of them, on older folk tales, which would have been stories that people told to each other but hadn't written them down, as well as ancient myths. They were popular among the aristocrats. They didn't work, so they had plenty of time to sit around entertaining each other by telling amusing stories with magic in them. And these literary fairy tales actually were written for adults, not children. Children's versions came along a good century and a half later. And we're going to be reading some of these so-called original versions that have a lot more sex and violence than you would probably think. But this video promised you three major authors, and here's the first one. Madame Marie-Catherine d'Aulnoy married a much older man when she was only 15 years old. There were some scandals attached to the marriage, so she actually left France until she was a much older woman. When she came home to Paris, she started a salon, and the closest thing today might be a regular dinner party. A bunch of rich and famous people would get together and tell jokes, tell stories, listen to singers, basically just hang out and have a good time. The best salons were where the wittiest intellectuals shared their opinions on politics of the day or debuted their brand new literary compositions. Madame d'Aulnoy published two collections of what literally in English means stories of fairies. We don't read many of her fairy tales today, but they are chock full of characters and events that you associate with fairy tales. Fairy godmothers, ogres, balls, mermaids, dragons, curses, jealous stepmothers, talking animals, and yes, even Prince Charmings. This is literally the guy's name. Many of Madame d'Aulnoy's fairy tales focused on issues of marriage. How do you find the right husband or wife? These were also some of the concerns of our next major French fairy tale author. Whether you know him or not, Charles Perrault is responsible for many of the fairy tales you might have grown up with. Like his predecessor, Madame d'Aulnoy, he was born to a wealthy family. He was so aristocratic and privileged that he was actually an advisor to the French king, Louis XIV. And he published a collection of 8 fairy tales, which he also called Tales from Mother Goose, in 1697. These are some titles that you may recognize. Little Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, Puss in Boots, Sleeping Beauty, and Bluebeard. Perrault's versions of these tales have passed down to us with some very minor alterations over the last 300 plus years. The final author I want to present to you is Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont, a very fancy name for a lady who was born in very impoverished circumstances. She actually had her marriage annulled, and determined to make her way in the world, she left Paris and moved to England to work as a governess, which was a private teacher in a wealthy household. She was very committed to the education of young women, and she published a lot of manuals about best practices for teaching girls. In one of her publications, she included her version of Beauty and the Beast that we know today. So there's a quick introduction to some of the French origins of the fairy tale. If you want more details, check out the PDF in eCourses.